You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journeys of self-discovery. I'm your host, Vahagan Nernosian, and joining me today to kick off 2024 is Alina Pawchareune.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me, Alina.
Thank you for having me, Vahagan.
Now, this is the first time you've been on the podcast, so and I always ask my guests on their first time to tell the audience a little bit about themselves. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about who you are?
Yeah. Ooh, intros. Let's see where to start. No, just kidding. Alina Pawchareune, currently based out of Portland, Oregon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a first generation Asian American, and my upbringing's born and raised in Northwest Indiana, out of the cornfields of this small area called Wheeler, Indiana.
Nice. So, we've been talking about being on the podcast for a little bit of a while now, and I'm glad that you finally decided to come. And we actually had a little brainstorm session about what we were going to talk about. And so we had talked about talking about music, but is that still something you're interested in talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
So first we can start off with so you go to a lot of music festivals, right?
Yeah, I actually clocked in 7 music festivals in 2023, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
A little on the extreme side of things, but yeah.
What do you find is your main draw to going to music festivals?
Obviously the music, but there's something more with the group of people who decide to experience music festivals. So the community aspect, and I think the whimsical playfulness of being able to express yourself authentically in a place that is typically a welcoming and warm environment. And then I think just the spontaneity of serendipitous moments that you experience, where it's just you and your friends have found yourself into this magical circumstance, and it's that moment of wow, that was so cool, that wouldn't really happen anywhere else besides here.
Do you have an example of one of these serendipitous circumstances?
Yeah, let me think of a memorable one. I have to reflect back on all 7 festivals.
Well, what's something that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think so. This was the first year that I did international festivals, and let me see. One that came to mind. So at the beginning of last year, it was right around the early half of, it was right after New Year's. And my friends and I went to this festival called Day Zero, which was in Tulum, Mexico. And it took place in a cenote.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. So I think that alone, where you get on a bus, it was like a party bus, and they were playing music, and they had snacks and beverages that they would come down the aisle that you could purchase. But it was just everyone getting shuttled off to this cenote that was 30 minutes away from Tulum. And we arrive, and it's just this I think the architecture of the stages and the infrastructure, where you see them using natural just resources like trees and things to create stage arcs and support, and then just the disco balls hanging from the tropical trees. And there's this one instance where we found ourselves into this cave, and it was this really just quiet, chill space where people are just hanging out, and we just found a little cozy spot on a rock and just sat and watched, and the lights from the lasers outside were reflecting inside, and there are also some lights inside, but it was just a cave full of beautiful glowy lights and just a serene environment where it was just a wow experience. You wouldn't have this experience anywhere else.
Yeah, and Yeah, that sounds like such a unique experience. Like not just like both unique from the perspective of like a music festival, but also like from like even exploring a cenote. Like, and for those that don't know, like cenote, like how do you describe a cenote for those who don't know?
So it's basically natural water pool that is at the bottom of a cave, and typically there's
Or
an
like a sinkhole, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's an opening where like sunlight will come in, or you'll see streams of like water flow dripping in. That's my extent of how I would describe
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah. So then, like, I love this idea of them using the natural beauty of the land to really accentuate the performances and to create this like really wholesome experience.
Yeah.
Nice. So, that's definitely a beautiful memory. So another thing you talked about is how people can like show up authentically and like be authentically themselves at these festivals. What are some ways that you found yourself being like authentically you in these festivals?
Definitely I think my choice of wardrobe and how I like put my outfits together. And the other thing is just how you approach strangers, or like you walk into an unknown space, and just like how would I want to be perceived, and like that exchange of energy with others. What is that overall vibe I'm giving off? So like just being more vulnerable and like core to myself as I encounter these events, I would say, if that makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense or not.
Maybe
Other,
maybe an example or something
yeah,
will
I guess
help.
I'm
Yeah,
being
yeah.
very like high level because there's just, I think that it's just like general themes that are coming to mind, but I'll think of more specific moments. So uh, like okay, so thinking of clothing, but also usually if it's a camping festival, like the decor that you choose and how you choose to style and just make your home for the weekend. So like your campsite, the canopy, just the tapestries you choose, just like the arrangement and things. Another way of expression is like these totems, where I'm very short. I'm like 5 foot, so it's really hard to see things when you're in a sea of giants or like
Yeah,
tall
yeah,
people.
yeah.
But one way to overcome just not finding, if you're in a group and you need some sort of landmark, totems are a good way to identify where your peeps are. But creating a totem and putting that together is to a form of expression where you can just show up as like yourself, I guess. So just decorating in lights or whatever cute graphic that you identify with, or saying, but yeah.
Yeah. How have you decorated your totems in the past?
So this year, it started off with a sunflower, like a fake sunflower that had these moldable coils as a stem. And I actually had it on my bike. I put it on the basket of my bike.
Oh, nice.
So I used that, and I just put fairy lights with copper wire on the stem, so it lights up. And it kind of evolves as the festival goes on, where you'll find things like there's a disco ball necklace. So I attached it to the sunflower, and then like light sticks would get accumulated. So just like finding ways to attach it on. So that evolved from, I would say, like May time frame, and I think I went to maybe 4 additional fests afterwards, and the last expression of itself. And my friend Gabby helped transform it into this like amazing actual totem. But I used a duster extension telescopic pole
Oh, cool.
as the base, and then added more lights, and then we had this like cardboard cutout of a logo of this music festival project that I'm part of called Festesia. So using their logo, and just had like other lights and bubbles attached to it. But that was the latest totem that I worked on.
Nice. Do you feel like, since you said that it is an authentic form of expression, or a form of authentic expression, what do you think could be said about you from the totem itself, or the evolution of the totem? Do you think there's anything that like could be drawn about your maybe authentic self from that?
I guess and we talked about this earlier, but growth in terms of like it is continuing to evolve and change as it collects new resources, or just moments that I'm wanting to bring back with me, that become part of who I am. So, yeah, I guess that is a way to describe how my totem is a reflection of me.
Yeah. And is it like, what is inspiring some of this growth? Is it always like you deciding to choose, or is it like sometimes the environment, like maybe the needs like change over time and you need to grow to meet those needs?
I think it's definitely both. It depends on what that situation is, but typically it'll be maybe a spark of inspiration, or it could be circumstantial where something happens and a change needs to take place. But I feel like typically it's a mixture of both.
Nice. Yeah. And so when you're going back to the authentic self too, you mentioned also that when you're meeting with strangers, you like come into it with like a I think you said vulnerability, to be more authentically yourself. How does the interaction with strangers in a music festival compare with like interaction with strangers in a non-music festival environment?
Yeah, I think usually you are more open to being approaching other strangers for whatever reason, whether it's complimenting something that they have, like their outfit, or maybe if you're standing next to them during a set and you both are feeling the beat, and you just have to, I think, you want to share that moment with someone else, and you look over and you're like, yeah, did you hear that?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think just the more willingness to be open and to have those interactions with people that are strangers, comparing to like if you're on a train or public transportation. If someone approaches me, I'm usually like, what do you want? Like immediately that goes in my head. So I think like the context of the environment just really shifts how you perceive and your mindset of what these interactions may lead to. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess my question then would be like, how do we bring like that like mindset of the music festival to like more places in our life? Like, how do we get to the point where we can like be more open with other strangers, like find the connections, like because when you're like talking to strangers at a music festival, there's at least the connection of being like listening to the music, being at the festival. There's that like shared community with it. But like maybe it's harder to see the shared community in a lot of other aspects, like taking the train, for instance.
Yeah.
But there is a shared community there still, even if it's more invisible. Like you still live in the same area. Maybe you probably have a lot more things in common than you realize, but maybe it's a little harder to see that.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to be mindful of the biases we have, that the subconscious biases that we have when we are not around familiar people, or just that. But going back to what you're talking about is how do I bring music festival culture and experiences back to the day to day? That's one thing that I do love about music festivals, and why I love music festivals so much, is because it allows you to be explorative of kind of an alternative, quote unquote, fantasy land or like, temporary escape,
Yeah.
if you will. But the beauty of that is like being able to have these new and exciting experiences where you can see how kindness goes a long way, or community, or just helping, looking out for one each other, and how it just makes such a difference in your overall experience of that place. It's just very positive and happy, and then you just see the good in people come out a lot more. And I think it's a reminder that we can choose to bring that into our everyday real lives, as
Yeah.
we approach people and as we go into work, and just having that, I think, baseline assumption that people are just good, and we're all here, for whatever reason it is, of your own personal mission. But the more that we help each other out, the better and more pleasant it will be for all of us.
Oh yeah, for sure. While you're talking, one thing I was caught that I kept coming back to is this thought of like using words like real and fantasy, and it made me reflect on how a lot of people will sometimes say like, oh, things like music festivals or vacation, it's like a fantasy land, like you're living a fiction, like it's not real life, like you're enjoying your life, and that's not reality. Reality has to be this miserable, like soul crushing, like everyday, like monotonous experience. Like that's real life. But that's actually just as much as fantasy as going to a music festival or traveling the world or seeing the good in people, right? The Yeah, some people will tell me that I'm naive in when I choose to see the good in people and see the perspective, like see another person's perspective, and be like, okay, well maybe they're just having a bad day instead of like being a bad person. Some people will view that as naive, but I view it as just as naive as saying that all people are all bad, and that like people are like gonna hurt you, or like just by default are gonna hurt you. They're all different. It's all like you're still a single perspective. So in that case, it is still naive. But at least in the case of looking at the more positive side, you, it makes you more willing to open up. Like you're never gonna. Why would you ever want to open up to someone if you think that they're gonna hurt you? And if you think everyone is gonna hurt you, you're never gonna open up. And no one wants to open up to someone who's not gonna open up to them. Someone has to do it.
Exactly. And you can sense that too. I think people's willingness to engage or not, you just kind of get that overall feeling of their energy. Are they closed off, or are they open to it? And I think part of that perspective too is to be able to have empathy for others. I think that's a huge part of like how we view just our place in the world, and also how other people may be experiencing a similar situation, but just having different lived experiences. It could just completely be on a different wave than what you're experiencing.
Yeah. How do you like conceptualize, or how do you like understand empathy?
Empathy is just being able to, for me, is to be able to have, I think, a understanding that like your experience is different than mine. So just having the heart to feel compassion, and I think patience, and maybe forgiveness, in how my expectations of your reaction might be different than what I'm expecting you to do, but also knowing that like you are your own person and you see the world through different lens than I do. So I think just being able, it's that it kind of like open-mindedness, but just being able to um, have like that big picture view of someone maybe feeling something different than what I am.
Yeah. So in that case, it like requires a lot of like being able to make those perspective shifts and say like, or at least being able to say, okay, you have a different perspective from mine. I may not understand your perspective. I may not see your perspective, but I have a reason to suspect you're not doing something just out of the blue for no reason whatsoever. You have some kind of perspective that is governing that.
Right. Yeah. There's like a reason for why. they're doing something that the way they're choosing to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like the environment of something like a music festival makes it easier to empathize?
Totally. I think there are things that you just experience together that are that help form closer bonds with people.
Yeah.
An example is going to Shambhala for the first time. It's a music festival up in the west side of British Columbia, Canada. And to get in, it took 11 hours. And
Oh man.
I ended up driving solo from Portland all the way up to the campground.
Oh whoa.
So I made like an overnight trek, and then on top of that, you get funneled into this like dirt road. And I think it's only maybe a mile or a mile and a half, but it took like an hour to get to the main venue space where it's just a line of cars. And they have this system where they let a column of cars go in at a time, and they just kind of shift like the line placement of the cars. But you end up in this massive field, and you have your cars are all parked, and people are just like hanging out while they're waiting to get through security check and get their tickets checked. But it took like 8 hours from the time I got to the common space by the time I was able to get through security. And you just have to like find, I think, something to do with your time during that meantime while you wait. And part of that is to like be open and talk to your neighbors that are parked next to you.
You have a choice, right? You can choose to sit in your car and be miserable at the situation, and that is one thing that is a choice to do with your time. I don't know why you would do that, but but many people probably choose to do that.
And people were like, they were like napping in their cars, had the AC blasting, or just like sitting in their cars. But I was fortunate that the neighbors that were parked around me, they had a canopy set up and
nice.
chairs, and someone had their like DJ equipment where it was just like a small control panel. And I just like peeked my head and I was like, can I hang out with you guys? And it was just like so much fun and like a great way to pass those several hours of waiting where I could have been miserable by myself, just like waiting to meet up with my friends, where it's like it's like a lifestyle choice. It's like how you choose to see the world. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make the best and most of this shitty situation, but we'll see what happens. And usually with that approach, it's generally a positive experience.
And I think there's a powerful message here that like being like putting yourself in a situation that you're miserable with is a choice in a way. Here, let's move this a little closer to the water. It is a choice that you're making. And I feel like a lot of people find themselves in this situation where they're not happy with it, and they just see it as like a situation that has been bestowed upon them. Like they couldn't control it. This is the product there. This is just the environment. There's nothing to do except be miserable. But you can make the choice of, no, I'm going to connect with the people around me. Like even that is a shared experience. Even being in like this shitty traffic situation is a shared experience. And those shared experiences are powerful ways that we form community.
And make new friends.
Yeah.
Are around the world.
Yeah. How else are you gonna like? How do you normally meet people except for like just happen to be at the same place at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, technology is one way.
But even then, it's like even with technology, you're still at the same like maybe website place at the same
That's
time.
true. The commonality aspect of it,
Yeah.
but it's like how you choose to live that moment in that place or platform or whatever thing it is. It's again how you authentically show up, and the energy that you're putting out there, and the type of other energy that you're attracting back into your orbital.
Yeah, and people will know like if you've got a good vibe, they'll sense it, and you'll attract good times and good people. I think it's a lovely way to live, and I'm glad that you did stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been bringing back more into my day to day, especially of like how I lived 2023 is just like, especially being in a newer city. Like though I've been in Portland for almost 3 years now, I still feel rather new, especially with the pandemic, where just meeting new people and like going out there and mingling wasn't really a thing when we're in
Mm,
quarantine. But now it's like an opportunity to just like see a city and meet people, and just part of that is through the people and experiences is like how you call your place a home, and like how you view that city. So just being more intentional of like yeah, making those connections with strangers, because you never know who you're going to meet
yeah, yeah. You never know who's gonna change your life
or become your best
or
friend
become your
or
best friend or
your
your.
boo.
Yeah, exactly. Every every important person in your life started as a stranger.
I like that. That's very true.
Yeah. And I think when we remember that, it's like, okay, well, yeah, there, we have to see the beauty in everyone and the beauty in the world. And going back to the real fan and fantasy discussion, because I did have something I wanted to mention. This is something I've been thinking about a lot in the over the past several years, and especially this year or this last year, being unemployed and like trying to figure out like my way through an uncertain world, an uncertain life, where my sense of reality is now like kind of expanded, where I've always been like, I'm a daydreamer. I'm like always fantasizing about various things, both big and small, even if it's just like a meal I want to cook. Like I view like planning as a form of fantasizing, because like I don't know what's going to happen. It's just my view, vision, my dream, but that's as much of a fantasy as anything else. And then I realized, well, what is this default state of reality of the world that I define as reality, and why are all these other things fantasy? Because if I think about it, well, what I thought about in my default world was just as much a fantasy as me planning what my next meal is going to be, where my next trip is going to be. It was all like kind of fantasy. So then I said, okay, well, if it's all kind of fantasy and it's all kind of, then it's all like kind of reality too. So I can kind of, maybe I can do more choosing. I can choose more of what my reality is. I don't have to be sunk into this view of there is only one reality. And then I realized, well, I'm not really changing the outside world, but all I'm doing is changing my perspective of it.
Yeah, I it's a beautiful way to put that, because I had this thought the other day where it was like we create our reality. So part of that is to have a dream about something, and you can choose to act upon it or just let it continue to be a fantasy living in your head. But like we are able to shape, I think, our perceived world into whatever that can look like. And it's part of the dreaming and the fantasy is laying out the foundations and like the framework of what you want to mold your life to be, and like designing it into just an incredible life of whatever you define what that means for you. And we all have different goals, and ultimately we'll have different realities, but there is a commonality where we live in this planet together in the same space, and how do we work harmoniously together in order to like create a happy place for all of us.
Yeah. And then like consider this. Well, that what is that? But like if we're all having a vision like a thoughts like that, like how do we create the life we want to live but also live harmoniously? Well, that's how culture gets developed. That's how societies get evolved. Like this is something that isn't just unique to us in this time and space. It's been like this is the story of how human civilization has grown and has come about. Like even when the first like nomadic tribes formed the first cities, like 7,000 years ago, like something had to drive them to come to an area and like come together and then like come up with like like a broader identity. And like even though all these people had different visions and different wants and needs, a singular identity with singular needs kind of came about. And we see that forming on like scales all over the world.
Yeah, whether it's religion, whether it's country, or yeah,
And or even a music festival.
exactly. Just your campsite becomes your tribe and your identity,
Yeah.
and like you were all working within this larger system or ecosystem where the purpose in that context is to go to the music festival. But when we look at society and what that means, like there needs to be some sort of guiding, overarching principle thing that we're aligning in to like work towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like usually that comes from like what are the needs, right? And you know that goes into discussions of like, well, how do you organize societies? What are the main operating like philosophies that you use to define what the needs are? You know, so like maybe in some societies, the needs will be based on what's the communal needs, like what are the needs the most people have, or some societies, like our societies, it'll be the needs of what are the richest people have. And so, yeah, these needs these needs that the individuals have do kind of trickle up in a way and become part of the needs of the broader society. And then the needs of those broader societies become kind of the needs of the people too. Like it's like this feedback loop where you put yourself into the culture and the culture gives back and gives you something too, a part of your identity.
Yeah. A couple of things came to mind where it's just like like what you put out there is what you get back, in terms of resources, in terms of like value, and just things of those nature. And then I lost my train of thought, but going back to the resources, where it's like we have a limited and finite amount of things, where we have to share. And how do we do that in a way that's fair and will optimize optimize for just our ability to continue using that resource.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't all like die off.
Yeah, so we don't continue mining things until there's nothing else to mine, or eat all the food that has been grown on our planet. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. How do we do it?
That's where sustainability comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because we're not the only animal that like really changes our environment. Like ants change their environment too, sometimes in big ways. But I guess we have the scale, and we can change things on much bigger levels than a single ant.
We have a larger impact.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my my mom was even telling me of a time where she was like burning leaves right in her backyard to get rid of them, and then the smoke it created like just created this like smoke cloud in this neighborhood. And I was like, wow, you literally had a big negative impact on your environment, which is like, it's crazy, right? That we have the capacity to have such big changes in ways we don't really even appreciate sometimes.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about our impact on others, and just the decisions that we make has an outcome, and like what that could lead to. But yeah, I mean, maybe that was the only way your mom knew how to get rid of leaves, or she thought it was the best way to make it disappear.
It was more convenient than bagging
True, but now she has learned that it's a negative impact.
Yeah. And to live is to learn. Like if we're not learning, then we're not truly living, because it means we're never like really questioning and challenging our expectations. I've been reading this really cool book on like consciousness from like a physics perspective, and like really trying to understand like is there like a physical material like source of consciousness. And that's something that that physicists are trying to explore, because there's some really interesting questions in quantum mechanics that can't be answered potentially until we figure out what consciousness even is. But there's this theory about the mind and how it works called predictive coding, where if the mind was purely reactive, if humans were purely reactive animals, we would not be able to function properly in society, because our brains do so much processing that it takes too long to even just like process the visual images we're getting. So like it could take like even like a fraction of a second, but that means that like you can't do anything in real time. If like that, if a pedestrian runs in front of your car, like you would hit them for sure in like 9 out of 10 cases if we were just being purely reactive. But because our minds actually build in this like exception mechanism in it, where it predicts what's going to happen based on the information it's seen. So it's seen only partial information, kind of makes a prediction, and then it goes from there. But sometimes that prediction is wrong. But that's what learning is. When you learn, you then say, okay, I expected this to happen, and then it didn't, so I made an adjustment. And a nice example is that like I was walking around downtown with my girlfriend, and she was like, "How did you know that the crosswalk was going to turn the walk signal on this way?" And I said, "Well, I kind of saw the other one from across the street, and I saw it was counting down." And then I kind of figured, well, like, okay, that means the light cycle is about to change. So in like 10 seconds, I'm going to get this crosswalk. So like I didn't entirely know how that crosswalk mechanism worked for that intersection. Sometimes the intersections around here in Seattle are like different. Like maybe there's a turn signal that happens first, and so maybe there's a delay for the crosswalk. In which case, if that was the case, I would have said, okay, well, I would have adjusted and said, okay, now next time I need to look to see if there's a turn signal. But in this case, it worked out. So like we walked. But like that's part of this like learning process, where if you start to be aware and notice the biases and the expectations that you have, then when exceptions happen, you can adjust.
The way you're describing this just really reminds me of just how AI works.
Yeah, it is. I mean, neural nets are really good ways of like simulating and like representing like how the mind works in a way.
Yeah. And I think that's such an interesting point to bring up, where it's like, yeah, we process so much information at once, and it's like in order for our brains to make these decisions proactively, there has to be some sort of mechanism that's being predictive.
Yeah.
And I heard, well, my friend was telling me how, like, when we see things, our brain doesn't actually see the full colors and imagery of what happens. It's like kind of like filling it in based on your past experiences. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Because there's too much. There's too much to fill in to like use that all that information from the world, and we get all of this information, and it basically is kind of read as like numbers almost. It's really like electrical impulses, but like those electrical impulses don't like there's no like electrical impulse for red. Like it's all like inputs of data and like wavelengths of light, and like sometimes these wavelengths are like just arbitrary enough that like then it's our past then we need our past expectations to fill in the gaps. A really good example of this is the colors blue and purple. So the color blue,
like my hair.
yeah, like your hair. So some people, especially men, can't really discern really very well between different shades of
Yes.
purple and blue, because one, our eyes only within the last like several hundred years really evolved to better distinguish blues. But also, like, if you're not painting your nails or using the colors as much,
I love how that becomes an example.
you're not gonna see it. You're not gonna notice. And I make that example just because One post I saw on Reddit was like, here's a purple, here's a blue, but they look very, very similar, and like the comments were divided by like, they were like, oh, it's the same color or it's not the same
It's
color.
a different hue.
Yeah, it is a different hue, but like if you aren't used to seeing the differences, you'd say like they're both blue.
Yeah.
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 And like, they're right. They're like, in a way they're right. In a way you're right. Like you're both right. It's just that maybe you have a more nuanced view than they do. You notice these nuances. And like we only see such a small sliver of the light spectrum. Like other animals see like UV light, some animals see infrared light. Like there's so much more than what we think of as colors. And our moods can affect colors. Like I've heard a theory that, how Van Gogh later in his life used a lot of striking colors. Like think of Starry Night, like these dark blues and blacks, but like little blotches of yellow, like bright stars.
Contrasting.
The contrast. And one theory is that in his depression, he kind of was seeing things with like lower contrast. So for him, it seemed like this was more like less highly contrasted painting. This is how he was like noticing it. That's maybe how he like noticed the colors. I mean, obviously, it's not something we can truly know right now, but it's an interesting theory. And like we know that like when you are in a more depressed state, like it does kind of like affect how you see the world.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Like the way our senses work, and just if one thing is slightly impaired or just not functioning to its full capability, how that changes the reality and what you're experiencing. Last night, I put on my glasses because I'm very blind, but I have these newer prescription set of frames that I don't wear as often because the way the frame sits on my face, it makes me slightly dizzy just because it's not in alignment with my eyesight. And so I was sitting there, and rather than like having my backup glasses where I could just, easily switch out and put on, I didn't have that, and like my reality was just warped, and I just was not I felt uncomfortable. Like I just wasn't having a good time because I couldn't see straight, and it was just like severely impacting like what I was going through at the moment. But yeah, just speaking of slightly altering one of your senses.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I experienced that too. The other, like for a while I had to wear my glasses because like my eyelid was a little puffed up. So that's me. Don't worry. So when I was, but because my glasses are a slightly older prescription for my contacts, and because like my eye was like kind of puffy, like I, like it was like I felt almost like in a waking dream. It felt like I felt like kind of exhausted and awake at the same time. Like my body was telling me like, oh, your eyes kind of closed, you must be tired. So like it was like weird signals going on, and it's like I'm experiencing the same things like externally, but like my internal state is like all like thrown out of balance, and like I'm just like in this weird funk because of it. And yeah, these things impact you. I remember when I lost my sense of smell and taste when I got COVID.
Ugh, the worst.
And that was like, yeah, that was miserable.
Especially for someone who loves to cook and
yeah,
eat.
you know me. I love cooking. I love eating. And like for that 2 weeks, I like had no desire to eat. A lot of my I felt like it was like I felt so depressed. I was like, what if this continues forever?
What is the point of living if I can't eat?
Exactly. Yeah. Like I couldn't taste anything. So like I was like, what's the point? What's the point?
So I'm just not gonna eat.
What's the point? But of course I was sick, so I needed to eat.
That's funny.
I think that experience really made me appreciate. I think that was when I had a really big shift in my appreciation of food. Like really losing your sense of smell and taste. Like I was like, okay, yeah, I need to really appreciate everything I have, because you never know.
Yeah. No, I think it's a humbling temporary experience, but it
Yeah.
helps you, I think, get grounded to what really matters to you and what you value as importance and what makes life life.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are some things that matter to you?
Um, Positivity, uh, laughing, um, novel experiences, and connection with other beings,
Mm,
whether it's animals, whether it's people, whether it's nature. Um, yeah, I mean, there's just so much beauty in the world if we choose to see it because it surrounds us, but I think that's, yeah, the things that come top of mind.
yeah. And I mean, I can see how like music festivals fit into that. Like a lot of those seem to be like you seem to get out of the festivals, like the community, the positivity, the novelty, the experiences.
Yeah, and just how can we share that with each other and
Hmm.
give a little piece of yourself to others in like a joyous way. And one thing about music festivals that I loved and I've learned about is a gifting culture where it's like if someone had an awesome dance move, maybe you'll get like a patch or just something where it's recognition where someone noticed you and wanted to um, acknowledge and give that appreciation to you.
Hmm.
And that's something too that I try to bring back into the day to day as I function outside of music festivals. And something that also what's cool too is seeing what's a need or that's missing from this space and environment. And that's where a lot of like showing up as my authentic self and using my creative mind to like come up with these solutions that I could share back in the music fest community.
Like what?
Something I've been working on are these glasses chains,
Okay.
because so many times I would like put my sun or either like shades or it's just like a color lens where you could just see the light in a different way. But I'll put it on top of my head, and sometimes I dance a little hard.
He gets knocked out. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and I just lose my glasses, and I get so upset because I'm like, oh, I just had it.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I need something to like strap on, and so it stays attached to me. That's usually how I don't lose myself. My stuff is like it's attached to me in some form.
Yeah.
So I started making these like or getting glasses chains, but I'm like, oh, it could be cool to customize it and make it my own. So that's been something that I've been just working on the side, prototyping with friends, where I'll give them a chain that has their favorite colors or a word that describes them or something that is like a funny thing to them. And yeah, that's one example.
Nice. Oh, that's lovely. That's a great idea. And it's great that you're like giving, like you're kind of giving back to your community.
Yeah, yeah, sharing that whatever it is back.
Yeah. You know, when we were talking earlier about like how it feels connecting with people at a music festival, it reminded me a lot of like my experiences in like religion. And like when you'd go to these churches, you would basically like everyone there was part of your community. Even if you hadn't, if you've never met any of them, you didn't know their name, but they were still part of your community. And um, it just feels interesting the parallels between like a music festival and like a sermon. Like it maybe in a sermon there's more like pontificating and philosophical, religious, theological argumentation, but like there's also music, there's chanting, there's group movement and group intention that goes into it. Same that is similar things you'd see at a music festival, and I like these it's like beautiful seeing like people forming these communities and especially in like secular ways.
Yeah. Um, it's I think similar to what brings people together, like how we share meals and food, but it's bringing people together for a specific reason. And even like sports events. And there's just something so like wholesome, or just that like that good feel when you see people come together for a
Hmm.
certain reason. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that's shared in like those religious celebrations or moments or traditions is the music, and how we come together, and like everyone has a part in that, whether you're
Hmm.
singing a certain chorus or playing an instrument or conducting, but we're all part of something that is greater that we're creating together.
Yeah, and like music especially like is an ancient part of us. Like music is like has been part of our like worshiping and like a community building and like war gathering and things like that. Like anytime we needed to get people on the same page, we would turn to music, whether it be like drums, war, chants, or like songs or house music.
Yeah, I mean, music is a language, it's a form of communication, and um, it's it's how things are expressed, it's how you receive it. But yeah, I think
But
I
and it's like, but it's a very complex form of communication, and
yeah.
I think it's one that like it's hard for us to really understand. But like, because I think like very complex things can be expressed through music that we can't express yet through words.
Yeah. Um, ugh, I had a thought, but it lost me.
I'm thinking um like when I look at like classical music, and so like my mom is really into sound therapy or like frequencies and stuff like that, and there is some truth, some validity to like that. Some frequencies like do actually have an impact on our mental health. Like they can put us in meditative states. Like I have this Tibetan singing bowl that I like to use sometimes during meditations, and like it's like pretty simple, but like the sound, the vibration that it sets off can be very calming and like aid you in like your meditative trance because it makes it easy. It's like how white noise can be an effective tool for drowning out things and like putting you to sleep. Other types of frequencies like this can also have nice like mental impacts for you. And classical music, a lot of the classical musicians were very like there was a lot of mathematics that went into it because music is very very heavily in the maths, and there are some like really cool like effects because like it like it's like this cool like this intersection of like mathematics and rationality but also like emotions and like creativity, and it like some of these classical music pieces and even music to this day like they'll touch people on such a deep level. Like music, like I'm thinking like the when the Rite of Spring came out, like it started riots in like Paris. Like people burned the streets, like went to the streets because it was so like
It invokes an emotion.
it invoked so much emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to that point, it's like we all interpretate language differently. So we interpret music differently, or like how we are hearing that, what that might trigger or get a reactionary response from that person.
But I think there are some things in like some forms of music where it it's almost like it's outside of our personal interpretation. Like we will like most people when they hear a singing bowl, they will feel that calm that comes to them regardless of like their experience with meditation. In fact, I read an article, like a study where people who were not like had never done meditation before felt a greater effect from like from the sound of a singing bowl. So it's like it feels like it's almost even more even deeper than our personal like interpretations in some cases. Like it really goes down to like the nature of what it means to be human.
That's interesting. That
Yeah.
the frequencies goes back to.
Yeah. I mean, and I think part of it is like um, how the frequencies of the waves interact with our brain waves, and because we know that there are certain waves like that have longer wavelengths or slightly longer wavelengths that put us in the more rest and digest state. Like when we go into sleep, our mind is less active. I think that's the theta waves. I don't exactly know, but
Yeah.
it's like slightly lower frequency than like when we're awake. And so like tones that get you into that slightly lower like slightly longer frequencies can really help you like just feel calmer.
Have you experienced being in a theta phase before?
I mean, like, outside of sleep. I mean, like, I've meditated and stuff, so like that's usually how I'll get it. But I haven't done like things like theta healing or things like that. I'm a little bit more skeptical about some of that stuff, but I can be convinced with I could be convinced.
With the right guide.
Well, with the right reason. I like to try to stay like I like to try to believe in the spirituality, but also stay a little grounded into. My view is throughout our history we've pointed things to spirits and souls, that the things that we didn't understand. But then as we started to understand them more, we are like, okay, I guess that wasn't spirits and souls. And then we made it. Then we were like, okay, the things we don't understand now, those are spirits and souls. And then we're like, okay, well, maybe that's not spirits and souls. Like we used to think like demons were what were getting us sick, when really it was like the bacteria. And then we used to think that it was demons making us like people go crazy. But then we learned about, oh, okay, well, mental illness is a thing. And now we're like, okay, well, consciousness is a soul thing. So, but maybe one day we'll learn that those things aren't either.
Science, when science catches up.
When science catches up. Science is a very slow process. Yeah, but have you done any theta healing?
I mean, I was in a meditation session where it was done through this app called Clubhouse, and there's a meditation room where the guide was just doing a free flow guided meditation, and it was like 20 minutes in and I was sitting there, but I just felt like it felt like a dream state where I was like awake but like not really.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was like in my subconscious, but that was the first time I've ever experienced that, and I was just like, whoa, that was kind of wild.
It sounds like a lucid dream almost.
Yeah, in a way, but yeah, just like kind of like awake but sleeping.
Yeah. I mean, well, we know like things like hypnotism are real, and it kind of goes to the same idea of like these like some frequencies, like the sounding bowl. And like I want to be like specific here that like it's not like all frequencies. Some people will be like, oh, specific frequencies do very specific things, like cure cancer or something. Like a lot of that stuff I don't really believe in, but we know that hypnosis does work. It is a slight change in your like rhythm, in your like circadian rhythm or something, the internal clock of your head. And I think I don't know the full science, but it would seem like that would have a similar effect, where it would kind of put you in this half sleep state.
Yeah.
That's how I would kind of rationalize it. But we know that hypnosis is a real effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool what the mind can do.
Our minds are powerful.
Yeah.
Tool.
And like, what even is the mind?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it the neurons in our head? Is it the cells in our brain, or is it like something that emerges from that, or is it something else? Right? Is it a soul? Is it just the electrical interactions between neurons? Is it like is it like a little guy in our head? Is it like the Inside Out, where it's the little people in our head that like?
Could be. There's a little rat on top of your head, like from Ratatouille.
Ratatouille.
That's it. Our mind is Ratatouille.
One of my buddies says that he thinks of himself as like a guy sitting at home and on like a controller playing a video game, and like
That's
he's
some
seeing
Black
his
Mirror
he's
stuff.
seeing his world, and like he's like an old school gamer, I guess, because he only has the A button. So every time he's interacting with someone, he just presses A.
There's one option.
There's only one. I mean, it handles everything. He just goes for the default.
That's funny.
Yeah. Uh. Oh, I was gonna say something else, tying it back to music. Okay, so like, going back to music festivals, how do you like looking back at it, reflecting back at it? How do you feel like emotionally when you're a part of these environments?
Um, a lot of emotions. I think there's a sense of feeling grounded in the happiness component of just being something larger than yourself. There's also fear sometimes where large crowds can create anxiety, especially in like sea full of strangers. So how do you navigate to get from point A to point B
Like
through
literally navigate.
literally, especially as a 5 foot shorty, like how do
Yeah.
I find that pathway to get to the other side? And um, just that has been a fear that I've overcome this last year of like being able to blindly navigate through large crowds, which
Oh, what do you think helped you overcome that fear?
I think just observing how other people pass me, where there's a difference where someone's like shoving through brute force versus someone who is like making eye contact with you and gently like tapping your shoulder or letting them know that like, hey, I'm gonna kindly pass
Right.
you to
Yeah.
get to where my destination is. I'm not trying to get in front of you, but I need to walk past you in order to get to where I need to be.
Yeah.
So I think with that approach and just learning that, oh, there is a difference, there is a way to do this in a graceful manner where it's not so scary anymore.
Yeah, and well, I think that's a great way to start to look at it, because like now you're starting to pay attention to the interactions of between like total strangers, right? And like yeah, like I love reflecting on and like imagining the connections between people. Like sometimes I even think of it as like almost like an outline between them, like between groups of people. Like for instance, a family will, even if they split apart, they will always come back together. And so when I'm walking around, I'm like, okay, I see some of the kids walk around and like start to run this way. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna avoid that general path because I know the parents are gonna be slowly like coming right after. Likewise, you see a big group of people at like a club or a venue. Sometimes they'll form circles, and
Yes, a circle.
so that they can all like see each other and connect. And it's all these like kind of like, and so then you think like, okay, well, how are all these different people like aren't related to each other, like don't probably haven't met each other, but they all like do very similar things, like
Yeah.
the circles, the how groups move around like side by side, or like um in a row, but it's usually like more side by side. And then like then you can start to imagine like, okay, well, you can start to predict how groups are going to move, and then how you can move around them. And then you start to see, like, I love noticing like the flows. Like there are always groups of people that are like static, but then after a period some kind of channel forms,
Yeah.
like a stream of people form between these like static things. But like then, but no one is static, everyone is constantly moving. And when you start to like go with that flow and understand that flow, it's like it seems to make it a lot easier to navigate.
Yeah. And just what came to mind is like being able to see the stage is usually a difficult feat for me.
Yeah.
But it's like those micro adjustments where it's like, oh, there's a little window here. And if I just adjust myself or move slightly 45 degrees this way, I could just have a much better view and like completely different experience,
Mm-hmm.
because someone who's 6 foot versus someone who's 5 foot is going to have a completely different. This goes back to what we're talking about of how you like perceive reality to be different based on like
Yeah,
your
literally,
lived
your
experiences.
eyes are at different levels.
Literally.
Oh yeah, oh
so
yeah.
like you are experiencing something that's same but just very different based on your perception.
Oh yeah.
But
And you know what? I think tall people need to have a bit of a better, accept the perspective of shorter people a little bit more, and maybe be a little bit more, you aware of their surroundings.
awareness.
Right?
That's the
Like,
key word, awareness.
yeah. But it's hard. It's hard for us to, and it's like the people that push around, right? They see like they're like, okay, I don't care that there are people. I'm gonna just shove through. And then like they're taking that selfish approach. They're trying to be like I'm the important one here. I need to get to where I need to go. But then because of that, they're creating like a worse environment for everyone because now people are like being pushed. People aren't happy with that.
Tension.
There's tension. Your personal space is being violated.
Yeah.
And these same interactions happen with like gases under pressure. Like physicists have shown that the movement of crowds of human beings is governed by can be modeled by similar laws as we use to model gases under pressure.
So I'm just like remembering back to my college lectures of like these videos.
If people say like people who say like science and physics don't matter, they're like they just haven't realized how it does matter. But like
the uninformed.
When I read this paper, I was like, how is this possible? Like, human beings are so much more complex than an atom of a gas. Like a single molecule. Yeah, we have a mind, right? Supposedly that atom doesn't have a mind. But like the interactions are the same. Like we still, like that molecule of gas only takes up a certain amount of space. It doesn't want, like, there are forces between them that make it so you can't like have them smash against each other. And similarly, we have personal space. We don't like people getting too close. We can tolerate it to a point, but if you're like starting to like smush against us, we're gonna push back.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And when people are pushing and like trying to do the greedy approach and like make their way and like ignore how the crowd is moving, that's when you get into jams.
Like traffic jams.
Yeah, traffic jams. Yeah. Sometimes traffic slows for no reason.
Yeah, because someone driving slow is on the left lane.
Yeah.
That also reminds me of just like in those situations how we could be helpful for and supportive of each other. Like the other day I was at this like New Year's Eve event, pre-New Year's Eve, but someone in the crowd was looking for gum. And it was funny because I didn't have gum, and then I left, and then I came back, and it was probably like 10 minutes, and she passed by again. I was like, did you ever find your gum? And she's like, no. She's like, this whole time no one was able to give me gum. But I was like, all right, I'm gonna help you find gum. And like the first person I asked that was in my group had gum.
Oh, nice.
So it just like it relieved that pressure and tension for that individual. But yeah, I think just like having each other's back and like being, I think observant of your surroundings and how you can like help aid someone's experience to be better is also part of that emotional thing that gets brought out when being part of a music festival. It's like that gratification where you're able to help someone out.
Yeah. And like that makes me think of like the golden rule, right? Like do to others what you want others to do to you. And it's like this
Karma.
Well, I mean, it doesn't even have to be karma. It can just literally be like, it's like empathy. It's really a question of like, I want to be treated well. I know other people want to be treated well, so I should treat other people well. And like that rule is like such an ancient like rule of like not like a law, but like a point of culture that like helped keep us together for like tens of thousands of years.
And like what religion also kind of has as part of their principles and
Well, yeah, but that's why like, and that's how I know it's so ancient. Like, it probably predates a lot of the religions we have today. I'm imagining that this was like a culture that came about like during like the first cities, the first kingdoms, where all these diverse people. Some of them probably, many of them probably didn't even speak the same language, but like they had to like live together. And like when the first cities were formed, when the first city in Sumeria was formed, which is like the first recorded city that we know of, a lot of people killed each other. There was a lot of violence, and that's why like laws and culture and like some kind of identity had to get formed, so people would be like, okay, let's be a little bit more empathetic, and let's stop murdering each other. Let's figure out a better way to handle things.
yeah. When you're mentioning that, what came to mind is like who governs and maintain culture, like certain cultures.
I mean, we do.
I know, but like
Yeah.
it's all of our responsibility
It's all of our
to have
responsibility.
that in
Uh-huh.
order for that to become embedded into the culture.
For sure.
But yeah, I think just it's so interesting to think about.
Yeah, and it can seem so it can seem so far fetched that like we would have an impact on our culture because we're just single people. Like, how are we going to impact a whole culture of millions and millions of people? Well, I mean, how does anything happen? It just has to start on the individual level at some point.
You start with the self.
Yeah, and like we have to create the environment, that the culture that we want, and if it's a culture that other people want, then they will adopt it, and that's how these things spread.
Just like how a dream becomes reality.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it starts with the small intentions, the small moves, but those small moves aren't to be ignored. They're important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for a bit over an hour, and I want to be.
Wow, that happened very fast.
I know, right? It always goes faster than you expect, and I want to be respectful of your time because I know you have other plans today. But I always like to give my guests the last word. So, is there anything you would like to say in conclusion for our guests or for our audience?
Ooh, this seems so...
Anything you want. It can be related to the topic, or related to something you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just taking these lessons from our experiences, whether it's a music festival, whether it's traveling internationally, whether it's meeting new people, it's just like going back to the thought that we all have an impact on each other's and our lived experiences and realities. So it's like, how do we continue to remind ourselves of that impact as we go about our day, and how do we create a better place for all as we navigate through societal points of conflicts or whatever it is, new changes that happen as we think about the changes in our environment, political system, all of these things. Just we are part of that, and it's all of our responsibility to, I think, be accountable for our own actions and looking out for others.
Beautiful words. I think it's a amen.
Music festivals.
Music festivals.
Go to more music festivals.
Yeah, like it, and or at least concerts. Like being in places with music and people. It's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
You'll meet beautiful people.
Yes. Well, thank you for the time and for having me be part of your collective of episodes for Authentic Chaos.
And thank you for joining. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, unexpected. We talked about so many topics.
Always unexpected. Yeah, that's how these things go, and that's what makes it fun for me.
Yeah.
Thank you again so much, Alina, and thank you, dear listeners, for watching. If you've been watching on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, share the podcast, follow us on Instagram at Authentic Chaos. And 2024 is here, and we're ready. We're excited for a whole year of episodes and reflections. So join us for more. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness.